Hello, my name's Karina Thompson and welcome to another episode in the series Mastering the Basics of mySewnet Embroidery Software. In this episode, I'm going to be introducing you to frames and flourishes. If you're a subscriber or own a copy of mySewnet, or are just interested in finding out a bit more about embroidery software, why not subscribe to our free YouTube channel, and that way you won't miss out on any of our future episodes. In this video, I'm on a PC with the platinum level of software installed, but everything I show you, you'll be able to do on any of the paid levels of the software. And the principles will be exactly the same if you're on a Mac computer. So I have an embroidery in my hoop here, and I'm going to use that to show you how you can put various frames and flourishes around it, basically to make your embroidery a little bit more special. So when you click on the Frame tab of the software, this is the screen that you see. Now the most important thing is, please remember to select your design. And at some point, I'm sure in this film, I'm going to forget to do that. And that way I'll show you what happens. So I've selected my design by clicking on it. And as you can see over here in the film strip, my embroidery, my pink Cadillac, has got a blue box around it. So I know that that's selected. So let's talk about what's going on the Frame tab. Over here are the different options for you to choose what you want to do with your embroidery. So I'm going to start off with the frame. And if I click on this pull down arrow here, you can see all the many options that you have. And just so that you know, in terms of the software, there are nearly 640 different frames and flourishes that you can use. But to start off with, I'm just going to go with this applique shield, and I am going to go with the circle. So I've just clicked on it. That little green box that you can see around there is showing me that a selection has been made. Now next to it you need to decide about the margins. So this is basically, what will the gap be between the edge of your embroidery and your frame. So in this case I'm going to say, yep, okay, I'm going to be happy to go with a 5mm margin. You can use the arrows to go up or down if you wanted to, or indeed you could highlight it and type in that number. Now, just so that you know, it is actually possible for you to make this a negative number. So in this case, that applique shield might actually be smaller than the size of the embroidery. And in that case, you might want to consider checking the crop box, and that would basically chop off any of those bits that are outside of the frame. But I don't want to do that, and what I'm also going to do is I'm going to make sure that the group box is checked, and I'll explain why. So once I've made those choices, what I'm then going to do is I'm going to click apply, and straight away you can see what I've got here is basically an applique with a satin edge that is 5mm from the edge of my embroidery. And the reason why I would suggest that you check that group box is if you then need to move it within your hoop, if it's grouped, you're going to find that much easier to do that. If you didn't group it, you would if I then went to move it, I might accidentally just move the car or just the frame. Now what I'm going to do is I'm now going to go back a step. So you've got a couple of choices. I could hit the undo button up here, and there we go. There's a couple of other things in terms of the frames just wanted to point out to you, and that is that there is a huge range of different frames that you can see. All sorts of stuff from crests with laurel wreaths underneath, fancy stuff. But here's one of my personal, oh goodness me, here's one of my personal favourites. Now one thing that I would say is on all the categories of the frames, can you see we've got some frames that are essentially kind of square, or the proportions are all the same. And then there are some frames that are almost like portraits. i.e. they're tall, and then there's always some where that they are essentially landscape, they are wide. And in this case I'm going to use this Floral 2 MC because I think this is smashing. So I've selected it, you can see that it's selected because it's green, and then I'm going to check apply. Now you know I said that I would make a mistake, and here it is. Now because I've made a mistake, I can tell you the shortcut for undo, and that's Control or Command Z. Check that. Now the reason why that happened was I hadn't selected my embroidery. If I now hit apply, you can see that that's much better. Basically, if you don't select your embroidery, this margin isn't going to happen because there's nothing for the software to work against. So just bear that in mind. So remember, you must select your embroidery that you want to put your frame or flourish around. And I just think that's a great frame. And you can see how really quickly you can build something really special. So again, I'm going to do an undo. In this case, again, my shortcut, Control or Command Z, and it's gone. And so that I don't forget, I'm going to click select. So the next option are corners. And again, just like before, I'm going to check on that pull down button, and you can see we've got a lovely range of different, essentially decorative corners. And I am going to go for, yes, this one down here, this ornamental one down here. And again, I'm going for the landscape version. Just like before, we've got square versions, we've got portrait ones, tall ones, and then we've got landscape or wide ones. And I'm going to check on that. Okay, again, I've got my margin. I'm going to leave my margin at 5mm. I'm going to keep it grouped. And at this point, I want to talk about what's going on here with the stitch type, because sometimes there are options to change the nature of the stitch that frame or flourish has. So if I check on that, you can see I've got 3 options in here, because there's some running stitch, there's some triple stitch, and in this case there's a satin line. And I'm just going to check the satin line, and I'm actually, instead of having square end and start points, I'm actually going to check the pointy one in here. And then when I click OK, but this is where, for instance, let's say I didn't want such a dense satin line. For instance, let's say I'm working on quite a very fine fabric, that you could change that density, or maybe you want to make it wider. You can change it if you want to. It's really adaptable. So I'm going to click OK, and now I'm going to check apply. And I don't know if you can see here on the edge, I'll just zoom in, this satin edge, we've got pointy bits. And I just think it's a great feature that you can actually be so personal and very individual with that 639 frames and flourishes. Okay, and just like before, I'm going to undo that. Check the undo box, and I'm going to select it, because what you select is what you affect. And let's talk about here the side pieces. So I'm going to check that box, and again, just like before, on the pull down, and you can see we've got a range of decorative side pieces that you can choose. And let's go with the ornamental 2. So I've chosen that. We've got the green box around it. I'm not going to change the stitch type, but I'm just going to click apply, and there you go. You can see how easy it is to put some side pieces on. And again, we'll do the Control or Command Z just to take that out. So let's come on and talk about the flourishes. Oh goodness me, I'm about to make a mistake. I'm going to click on my car so it's selected, just like before, on the pull down arrow, and you can see there's this wide range of basically flourishes that you can have, sort of little decorative bits of embroidery. So we've got everything from sort of laurel wreaths to sweeps and swags, all sorts of stuff, but I am going to go with this one, ornamental one. Going to check that. Now the flourish options give you some different choices. You could choose to have your design above. Again, it's asking for that margin, so what would the distance be? And at this point I'm going to go with 100%, and again we're going with that check option of the grouping, and if you wanted to you could change your stitch type, but I'm just going to hit apply. And there you are. You can see straight away it's actually popped that flourish above, and this is exactly the same size. It's 100% of my the size of my Cadillac. Again, just going to take that out, Control or Command Z, select it again. But it might be, if you wanted to, you could check if you wanted your flourish below, but what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to go with duo, so that's going to put the flourish above and below. I'll leave my margin the same, but in this case I'm actually going to change this down to 75%, and then I'm going to check apply. And can you see it's actually just made that a little bit smaller? Well, it's made it 25%, so the size of these flourishes is 75% of the size of my car. And that's a really that's quite a useful feature. For instance, if you want to make your monograms really fancy, that's a really easy, quick way of doing that. And again, I'm going to undo that. Control or Command Z. I'm going to select it. Now the next option is about putting a border around the embroidery. So again, this is the active part, so we're moving it along the tab. So we've got 4 choices here of types of stitchery. So if I choose the satin line, a running stitch, a triple running stitch, or a motif line. Now what I'm going to do is the margin I'm going to leave at 6mm, and then you've got the choice of either rounded or square corners. Again, I would always say opt with the group checkbox unless there's a really specific reason why you wouldn't do it. If you wanted to, you could add an applique fabric and the stop, so that your machine would, depending on how you program it, that they might put a placement line down, then a marking line allowing you to cut round, those kind of things. Okay, I'm not going to worry about that. I'm just going to hit apply, and there you go. You can see we've got a lovely nice dense satin frame border around that. Just going to undo that and check it. But what you could do is, if you chose the motif line, and in this case I am going to go with the rounded corners. So if I click on stitch type and choose motif line, the dialog box will open. Now the default always is universal general motif number 5 this star, but as a point of interest, if you actually click on the pull down arrow by universal, if you wanted to, you could actually access virtually all the decorative stitches in a Husqvarna, Viking or Pfaff sewing machine. So that's a great way, for instance, if you've started a project and maybe you're using the decorative stitching elsewhere in your project, that you can match it with what's going on in your embroidery. So let me show you what I mean. So I'm going to go with Husqvarna Viking, and then I'm going to choose quilt stitches, and then I am going to go with stitch 43, which is like a little clover, double-sided clover. It's one of my favourites at the moment. I'm not going to worry about, but if you wanted to, you know, you could spend hours tweaking and playing all sorts of stuff. You can change the size. I'm not going to worry about that. I'm going to click OK, and then I'm going to click apply. And as you can see, I've got a decorative border that's going around my embroidery. Now, a top tip I would say is I would always go with the rounded corners feature if you're using a motif stitch. It tends to fit a little bit better doing that. So once again, in this time, I'm actually going to check the undo button. Remember, what you select is what you affect. I'm going to select my pink Cadillac again, and let's talk about what's happening with the motif underline. Okay, and we're all the way over here. So we've got some choices. So if we know our exact length, we can actually type that here. Now if I look over on the design panel, it's actually going to tell me that. So I can see that this design is virtually 130 mil. In actual fact, just to show you, I'm going to make it exactly what it says there, which is 129.5, because you can be that precise. And then it's saying select motif, and this is where it's going to open up the motif line box from before. And in this case, I'm going to go with I'm going to stick with the Husqvarna Viking quilt stitches, but I mean there are hundreds of embroidery stitches in there for you to access, but I quite like this stipple here. So this is quilt stitch 61. I'm going to go OK, and then when I check apply, can you see I've got a line of stippling underneath here? And it might be that you want to actually have a very specific number of the stitched patterns, like the completed decorative patterns in here. So for instance, if I'm opening up the motif line dialog box, and if I go to the pull down arrow and just go back up to, here we go, 57. So it might be that I very specifically actually want 4 of these patterns to underline my embroidery. So I've chosen that. I'm going to click OK, and then in this case I can choose repeats, go with 4 repeats in there, and of course again you can move that up or down, but I want to go with 4, and then I can click apply. Now before I click that, at the moment, can you see we've actually included, because this is grouped, it's actually going to underline the whole lot. So I'm then going to click apply, and there we have, I've basically got 4 of those wavy lines on there. And just whilst we're on that point, I'm just going to go to another embroidery design that I've got in a hoop. So you can see I've got a couple of embroideries in here, a couple of vehicles, and I've got the frame tab, but let's say I actually wanted this one, this applique sheets 3, number 9. I'm going to check yes. Now again, so remember, you must select your embroidery. So if I click apply, that's just going to happen in the center. That's no good to me, so I'm going to take that out. If I want to have that applique, that frame going around both of these, it's no good just selecting one. Let me show you what I mean, because that's just going to put that frame around the one green beetle car. What you need to do is you need to group your embroideries together if you're looking to put a frame around them all. So in this case, I'm going to hold down my Control or Command key, and I'm going to click on the other part of that embroidery, and that has done a group select. We know that it's some kind of grouping because my handles have gone orange on here. And now if I then hit apply, that's going to put that frame around both my embroideries. So my golden rule about frames and flourishes is what you select is what you affect. If you want to put a frame or flourish, border or an edge around your embroidery, make sure you've selected it. My second rule isn't really a rule, and that's Have a look at what's going on with your stitch type, because there are so many options that you can do to change and customize the aspects of the stitch within those frames and flourishes that it's just such great fun. If you found this a useful film, please give us a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so we can help you master the basics of mySewnet embroidery software. Happy sewing!